Okay, the 9th of September, we are not only on our daily journey of praying for Israel, but we have a special day today. And we will find out in a moment why this is also a special day for other reasons that I didn't know until I just chatted with our wonderful guest. But Lord, we love you. We pray you would bless this time as we learn, as we grow, as we seek to know your word and your ways, as we look at today's events in the light of the Bible and the prophecies and what you've spoken. So thank you for greater understanding and encouragement or fresh fuel to pray as watchmen on the wall. So we thank you for that. All right, well, welcome to everyone. And if you're been on this call a long time, or if you're new, my name is Patricia Bootsma. We are on this journey since October 7th of 2023 to daily weekdays pray for Israel, the Jewish people. Today is a special day. It's not going to be like normal, where we just have 15 minutes with a guest and then we go into rapid fire prayer. We've asked this special guest to stay for an hour and teach us. And so Dr. Jacques Gauthier, known him for a number of years because we met in Toronto some time ago, many years ago through mutual friends. And just want to say we are really privileged to have him share with us with all of his training, learning. He's a legal expert in all things Israel, the legal right of the Jewish people to the land. He has presented before the EU and the UN and various parliaments, including France, Italy, Canada, America, other places. He also was born in Canada, in Quebec, and French Canadian, but also lived in France for many years. I grew up there also. So there's a lot of European knowledge. And this is all very, very relevant to what we are discussing in terms of the worldwide stand regarding Israel. So without further ado, Dr. Jacques, I thank you so much for coming on. I'm going to highlight you and you're going to be screen sharing, but we're excited to learn from you. By the way, I will put in the chat your dissertation. Amazing. Thank you so much for making it free to people. And it is, you'll comment on that, I'm sure, the sovereignty over the old city of Jerusalem. I'll put it in the chat because people can access it through a link that you gave us last time. So please, over to you, Dr. Jacques Gauthier.
Thank you, Patricia. It's a tremendous privilege to be able to do this right now. I'm just bursting at the seams. There's so much going on around us right now, which is based on falsehoods. It's not the truth. And I was called many years ago to dig in, to look at the issue of sovereignty over Jerusalem, sovereignty over all of the areas that were covered by the Mandate for Palestine. And it took years, took 20 years to put the puzzle together. And there'll be a little bit of show and tell right now before I present some slides. But the result of 20 years, some of you were there before, is this document, the PhD thesis. It weighs actually 10 pounds. And the relevance of the size of this work is that to get the right answer takes a long time. There are so many pieces of the puzzle that it's so easy to get the answers wrong, which makes it easy for those who want to present false narratives to concoct things that are politically based and nothing to do with law. The timing of this presentation is so crucial because today, being the 9th of September, is the first day of the 80th session assembly of the UN General Assembly. It begins today and will continue until September 29. This is when the nations are going to gang up. They're going to pounce on Israel. What's the core of everything right now, my friends, is the issue of identity of Israel, identity of the Jewish people, their legitimacy. Are they legitimate or illegitimate? Are they thieves? Are they usurpers? Are they outlaws? Are they criminals? The nations, majority of them say they are. And in the following days, they're going to take steps introduce resolutions in order to take away the core, the pith and substance of the land from the Jews. Can you imagine? Their aim is to get the Jews out of all of what is called East Jerusalem beyond the Green Line, which means the entirety of the old city. The resolution passed a year ago, which I'll mention by the UN General Assembly, demands their exit by September 18 of 2025. Therefore, in a few days, they were supposed to depart from every component of Judea and Samaria of the old city of Jerusalem. Of course, it's absurd. It's abominable. But what we have to do is not just sigh and lament. We have, each one of you, each one has to do what she or he can do to speak the truth. And what I'm going to do today is try to give you an understanding of the legalities, because ultimately, this is not just politics. It's about the legal rights under international law of Israel and the Jewish people. So you will see in the next half hour or so the key components of my conclusions, of my arguments. Conclusion: sovereignty title over Jerusalem was granted to the Jewish people by those who had the legal power of disposition. They had title and could give it to the Jews. Nota bene. I'm going to show you something. I'm going to show you a book. And as Christian scholars and other scholars, I'm sure you've seen literally hundreds of maps relating to the Holy Land. I'm asking you to note well this particular book. I have an original published in 1915, and it is a vital piece of evidence, and you'll see it in my slide. You'll get more information. But what I want you to do at least once in your life, from the original, note that it contains a map. It's map 34, and I'll show it to you in a slide. But this is show and tell. This is the original. And I'm going to tell you today, part of my presentation is to tell you that this map is legally relevant. It's material. In addition to that, my presentation will underline the fact that the legal arguments are based in part on the keynote conclusion in the key meeting that the historical connection between the Jewish people and what they call Palestine is not only well-founded, but it should be recognized in international law. So there's been a multiplication of UN resolutions, a multiplication of acts of the International Court of Justice. I'll mention those to you. All intended to take away from the identity and legitimacy of Israel, of the Jewish people. And this historical connection is the foundation. And today I'm going to keep saying to you, nota bene, don't forget, please note. And if you have a phone, you can even make a picture of what I will be showing you. What is important in my work, this is the key to my work. And this is what I want you to remember, because I'm hoping and expecting that you're going to carry on. You're going to help to propagate the truth with me. The key is to distinguish between the facts that are legally consequential and those that are merely politically impactful. If you mess up, if you don't understand the distinction between what is relevant in law, you end up with false narratives and conclusions. Whatever I say today, you shouldn't assume that I'm saying that the Arabs, those who are in Israel, those who are in the disputed territories, have no rights. My focus is about sovereignty, legal entitlement, title to Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria. The Arabs have civil rights. They have the rights to have their religious organizations protected. They have rights. The political rights may belong in some realms, in some issues, to the Arabs, but legally the land belongs to the Jewish people. What the International Court of Justice did in July of last year, 2024, it rendered an advisory opinion, which is probably the most significant decision in the annals of international justice, whereby the court has done nothing at all to recognize the rights previously given to the Jewish people. It is a perversion of justice, and I'll talk about that. So let me now focus. I have very little time. Can you imagine? You saw the amount of work that was done over 20 years. Now I have to summarize that with you in a short time. So let me turn to, you'll see me hopefully on the corner of your screen. Okay. So what I'm going to do is not only identify the most crucial events. Let me make sure, Patricia, can everybody see
Yes, yes,
this?
it's good. It's good.
Okay. So it's not only a matter of presenting the key historical facts, but I want to link them. What's the nexus between them? So you've mentioned, Patricia, that for those who are interested in looking at the components of the thesis, it is available from the National Library of Israel in Jerusalem, where I've been interacting with them. And it's amazing because it's there, it's in Jerusalem, it means the truth is coming from Zion. That makes me very happy. The Balfour Declaration. We'll start there. This document is probably the one that most of you have heard about. And when I speak around the world, it's rare that people have never heard of the Balfour Declaration. But what you should understand is that even though it was politically very, very important and consequential, it was not the source of the rights ultimately granted to the Jewish people. This very important declaration supports the Zionist movement. It agrees that the Jews should be entitled to establish their national home in Palestine. It was not a declaration of a man called Balfour. It was a decision of the British War Cabinet, the entire cabinet, in October 1917, decided to endorse and support a movement. What's interesting is that Palestine in 1917 was not known as Palestine. It was subdivided in Ottoman territories. It's also noteworthy that the British were not in possession of those territories, and at that time they did invade and take control later, shortly after, but not in November of 1917. They didn't have title, and they didn't have possession. If you buy a house and you're buying from a party that does not have title, you're not going to get the good title. The British didn't have title. What's significant, and I will show you that in just a few minutes, is that this policy, huge disposition favorable to the Zionist movement, was like an egg that is going to be fertilized, was adopted later by those who did have the power of disposition. We'll talk about that. But before you understand the significance of the Balfour Declaration politically, you have to remember that in 1896, many of you know that, a very established, prominent Jewish man from Europe, Theodor Herzl, who had believed in different solutions to the Jewish problems in Europe. Note the title, The Jewish State, an attempt at a modern solution to the Jewish question, the Jewish problem. The Jewish problem is not a problem of the Jews. The Jewish problem then and now is the problem of the nations. The Europeans, others worldwide, have not dealt well with the Jewish people. They're prone to persecute them, to kill them, to take away their goods, to expel them from their nations. And Herzl, who was very established, good-looking, prestigious guy in Europe, all of a sudden realized after the trial of the military officer Dreyfus in France, he decided the solution isn't for us to assimilate. The more I try to assimilate, the more I see others trying to assimilate, the more they continue to be disrespected and their rights breached all over the place. And the solution, there's one solution. We need a state of our own. That's the solution. Then he does something rather amazing because he brings together about 200 people in Basel, Switzerland, and in August of 1897, and they actually agreed to support 200 Jews in agreement. That's a miracle, you know, and they agree to support his vision, his solution, and to create a for the Jewish people, a legally assured home in Palestine. This is a very key moment because what happens later during the Balfour Declaration is a response to the movement that was really launched. Zionism has existed for thousands of years. It's all over the Bible. But the political movement really took off because of the Basel Conference. So let me take you to the Rapallo Conference. This is one that you probably don't know about. Why have I included this? This is a lovely place in Italy on the coast, not far from San Remo. That's the hotel at the time. And what happens there is that we're in November 1917. The Allies are not doing well. They've lost some battles against the Turks. And they decide we have a problem. And they decide to get together in order to get better organized and have a proper strategy. And they create the Supreme War Council. So nota bene, please, if you're making notes, one cornerstone again is understanding the Supreme War Council. Why is this so important? So initially it was Britain, France, and the UK, and later the US and Japan. Five nations constitute the Supreme War Council. Sneak preview, they're very important because they end up getting the very title which is then conveyed to the Jewish people after. Paris Peace Conference. The Quai d'Orsay, which is today more or less, it looks the same as it did in 1919, is where the nations gather for 6 months to deal with all of the issues coming out of the First World War. And this is where almost the whole world was going to be changed by these deliberations and decisions. Yeah, but as far as the Middle East is concerned, the British took control of Palestine by September of 1918. The armistice agreement with the Turks, you've got the date in October 18, and Palestine was occupied from October 30, 1918 to 1923 because the Turks did not hand over title until 1923. Please note, occupied. Occupied is not a bad word. Occupied is what happens when there's no final disposition in law as to who's what. So to the extent that the so-called West Bank is occupied, it doesn't give any title whatsoever to those who are subject to the occupation. But those who politically have different motives, what they think is that even though you lose a war and your territory is occupied, the defeated nation, or people in this case, should get back what they lost during the war. That's not the way it happened for centuries and centuries. Paris, 4 key people. I mentioned the Supreme Council. The leaders are Lloyd George, Britain; Orlando, Italy; Clemenceau, France; Wilson of England. They are the ones during the Paris Peace Conference that deliberate to make decisions. During the Paris Peace Conference, please note these 2 dates. The claimants to the territories that were Turkish Ottoman territories, those who want to get these territories since they are under the control of the British and their allies, Arabs and Jews. On February 6th, the Arabs present their claim at the Quai d'Orsay in a particular room, and note who is listening to them. The 5 powers I mentioned to you before. There are names there. I won't go into the details, but Lloyd George is there and others. So what happens here is that the Arabs present their claim. What you do in court, whether it's in Canada or in the US, we call it a complaint, is you present to the judges what you want. Your presentation is not binding. It's what you want. The Arabs presented their claim. They want to be recognized as a people in international law. And they wanted independence in certain territories, most of the territories that were previously Ottoman territories where Arabs lived. But in their presentation, note, they say Palestine, they're not asking for sovereignty. They're not asking for that territory to be part of their independent realms. That's part of their presentation. I speak to Jewish people all over the world and say, do you know that in Paris at the crucial hearing, that's what they said? Now on February 27, the Zionist organization led by Wiseman, Sokolow, make their presentation. What are they asking for? Please note, they're asking for the recognition of their historic title, the title of the Jewish people to Palestine, and the rights to reconstitute what they used to have, their ancient land. Do you see the significance of that? The historic connection is there all along. It's not a matter of creating, it's there. They want it recognized as the basis for their return and right to note, reconstitute. Can you imagine if the judges, if those who have the power of disposition actually say yes to both of those? Yes, we recognize your historic connection. And yes, you can rebuild what you used to have. If that's the case, then you need to know what was there. And that's why everything, the biblical accounts, which are in many respects, can be proven today, whether it's the first temple in Jerusalem, the second temple in Jerusalem, the fact that in Shiloh in Judea and Samaria, there was once upon a time a whole community all over the place. You can prove that there was a Jewish presence, a Jewish communities, which they have the right to reconstitute. And they present their the borders that they want. And here's the map that they present. What's interesting about that, if you know the allotment to the 12 tribes, it covers every inch of territory that was biblically relevant. The 12 tribes were given chunks of territory in all of that area. So they're asking the powers to give them recognition so they can set up their new state where it was biblically, historically relevant. Covenant of the League of Nations. During the peace conference in Paris, a huge thing happens. The first international organization is established, the League of Nations, 1919. Why is that important? Here are some details as to when that was set up and when they started to gather and meet. The League headquarters were to be in Geneva, and it was very important. The very sad aspect of this is that one of the key architects of that organization was President Wilson. And because of political problems in the US never joined the League of Nations. And that caused a weakening of the League of Nations. And as I look at the UN today, I've become really quite knowledgeable about the League of Nations. I know the faults, I know the weaknesses, I know the problems, and I am so concerned about the United Nations right now, to the extent that the League was weak and sick. The United Nations has become so deprived. I take the position, this is my opinion, this is not a fact, this is my opinion, that the General Assembly of the United Nations has now become nothing more, nothing less than an accessory, a subsidiary of the Palestinians and the allies of the Palestinians. If you did a careful study, you might find out that there are over 50,000 civil servants linked directly or indirectly to the UN that are Palestinians. They subsidize, they carry everything that matters to the Palestinians. And that means I think the UN is doomed. It's not good for the future. So in Article 22 of the Covenant, there's something absolutely extraordinary. They adopt this new concept that instead of just taking over the territories that they've conquered, the powers are willing to set up trusts in many of those territories. It's called a sacred trust. Incidentally, you know, the covenant of the League of Nations. I wonder where they got that term covenant. Of course, we know where that came from. And in this covenant, there's Article 22. It's important. It is a pillar of my argument because the rights given to the Jewish people in Palestine are based on Article 22 in part. Just an example. I told you the principal Allied powers are key. You need to understand how important they are. Look, in respect to Germany, the Treaty of Versailles, territories are taken away from Germany. And who gets the rights and title? Do you see that? Who gets it? Those powers. And that's why I'm telling you now we have to ask the question, if the powers got title and sovereignty over all of the Ottoman territories that were taken away from the Turks, what did they do with it? Here we go. Defining moment of history. So now you're not allowed to be distracted. Whatever's happening around you, please. This is a defining event. It is an absolutely vital event in my analysis. In Italy, in a place called the Villa de Vachon, where I've been many times, I've had conferences in San Remo. I've been to that villa many times. It looks quite nice. It's now a luxury condo in San Remo, and there's quite a few stories I could tell you, but it's there. It looked like that in 1919, and now this. And in April of 1920, remember the Allies heard presentations from the Arabs and from the Jews in February of 1919. But instead of decided then, they were busy with other issues like the German situation, how to deal with Germany. They postponed their decision and met in San Remo in this villa in April for the purpose of deliberating and deciding in regard to the claims of Arabs and Jews, how they were going to proceed. So you see the key representative. Lord George played a huge role, hosted by the Italians. Prime Minister Nitti, the president of France, was there. And then they decide to take the principles of the Balfour Declaration and make it the basis for their determination and decision. So that the principle, the policy of the Balfour Declaration is now incorporated into international law. This is a key moment in history for the Jewish people. What's interesting is that during the deliberations, Curzon, who was a Secretary of State, makes it clear that the rights being granted are not for just the Jews of Palestine at that time, just a couple of 100,000, it's for the Jews worldwide. They're considered virtual inhabitants. This is a term we understand these days, virtual inhabitants. So now, please, look at this. Lord George has discussions with the French and the Italians, and they're asking him, well, if we're going to give them a home, if we're going to give them a state, what should the boundaries of that state be? Lord George responds, he was a Bible scholar. He was a Christian, a devoted Christian believer. He read the Bible every day. And he said, well, that's not a problem. We're going to give them the historic towns from Dan to Beersheba. You've heard that expression? It's all over the Bible. But the others around him said, what do you mean? What are you referring to? And he said, well, I got an answer. I'm gonna show you the map 34 from the incredibly thorough book of this man, George Adam Smith. And here's the map that I showed you. I showed you the original. Can you imagine this? Map 34. Please remember the name of the book, the name of the author, and the map. Why? Because Lord George says, that's the territory we're going to give them. And they agree. In fact, later on, when the British were trying to get too much land on the north near Lebanon, the French said to the British, wait a minute, we agreed the territory would be based on map 34. So even the French relied on this map. So you may have 1,000 maps in your homes. This one is relevant in law. I'm just showing you a map of Jerusalem that's in the same book in 1915. That's Jerusalem. Jerusalem is entirely more or less contained by the old city. For almost 2,000 years, when you talk about Jerusalem, it was the old city. And what the resolutions and opinions of the LCJ today are trying to accomplish is to take the entirety of that, meaning all of Jerusalem, all the sacred components of Jerusalem, take it away from the Jewish people. So it may be, I speak to a lot of Jewish audiences, and sometimes I thought maybe I need to read this because they might think that I'm exaggerating, I'm amplifying the significance of the San Remo decision. But look at what Wiseman had to say. This is the most momentous political event of the history of our movement. And perhaps no exaggeration to say in the whole history of our people since the exile. If you think I was exaggerating, look at what he's saying. Please, my friends, I cannot sufficiently underline the significance of St. Remo because that's the genesis in international law of the rights. After that, there was a conference with the Turks, resulting in the Treaty of Sèvres of August 1920. And you will see, look at Article 132. You don't need to go to law school to understand the significance of that. Please agree with me. It says that by the Turkey hereby announces in favor of the principal Allied powers all rights entitled concerning the territories outside of Europe. Can you have it more clear than that? Title goes to the powers, therefore they can give it. So there were boundary agreements between the British and the French because they were the mandatories chosen during the, I didn't stress that, but the British were chosen as mandatories over Palestine and over Iraq, and the French over Syria and over Lebanon. So they were designated mandatories. The five powers had all the rights, but they delegated that to them, and they, between them, made the agreements. Now, the mandate for Palestine, the Magna Carta of what I'm presenting to you today. And I actually was able to locate the original signed copy, which is at the National Library. I received, after searching and searching, I received a CD which gives me all of the documents. And can you imagine the National Library in London, England, couldn't find the original? It took them months. And finally, the lady, an older lady who was in charge of it, they wrote to me and said, I found it. I found it. It was in a file with the East Africa, Togoland, and Cameroon mandates. It was tucked away under these three. And I have the details concerning where one can find this. It is indeed a very, very special document. So it was in London in July of 1922 at St. James Palace that these powers met. Now, this is not the five Supreme Council members of the Supreme Council. It's now the members of the Council of the League of Nations who have received from the Supreme Council certain powers, and they are the ones who review the draft documents and approve them. You'll note that among the eight is France, the British, Spain, all the nations that are leading the assault against the legitimacy of Israel today are the ones who are the key members of the council. And what they did is they adopted the principles of the powers in San Remo. And they, in the preamble, they specify that the recognition is given to the historical connection between the Jewish people and Palestine. Remember, that's what the Jewish organization wanted to get. They give it to them. And the right to reconstitute what they used to have, which means all of us should be looking at what they used to have in all of Judea and Samaria, in Jerusalem, because they have the right to reconstitute their nation there. Article 2 is the key article because it says that the mandate of the British is to establish a Jewish national home. And also that it's supposed to be done in accordance with the principles laid down in the preamble. Those are the principles I just showed you. How is this new nation to be set up? Based on the recognition. Now, don't have much time to talk about it, but Article 25 was added by the British after the initial draft was submitted. It gives the mandatory, and they didn't have the right to do this. The principal powers never agreed to this. British ultra-vires on their own decide to give themselves the right to partition Palestine. And we'll see what happens. But I want to underline the articles 15, 16, and 18 that I mentioned there. No matter what they do, they have to continue to honor 15, 16, and 18. What do these provisions relate to? It's certain rights. There can be no discrimination of any kind between the inhabitants of Palestine on the grounds of race, religion, language. And then 16 protects all religious organizations as well. So no matter what they decide to do on the partition, these rights have to be respected. Can I don't have time, but can you note these articles? Because they're relevant today as the nations tried to drive Jews out of Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria. They contravene these provisions. In Geneva, in October of 1922, the council meets again, and on the 16th, 1922, hugely relevant, a memorandum from the British relating to the partition of Palestine is examined, and they make a decision. And the decision is to go ahead with the partition based on Article 25. And in this decision of the council and involving the British take full responsibility to make sure that everything that is not altered by the partition terms, it continues to be respected. Meaning, these articles 15, 16, and 18 I showed you were supposed to be honored in the new state that they created. Here's what Palestine was supposed to consist of. And here's what happens because of the partition. Look at this. Look at the size of the Arab territories because of the British victory. Look at areas covered by these territories. And all of a sudden, 60,000 square kilometers is taken away from Palestine and given to Arabs, So here's the catch. When so much was given to Arabs, the contestants, the claimants were Arabs and Jews. Today, the Arabs don't want to be known as Arabs. They're known as Palestinians. Because if you look at the pie that was cut, they got so much of the pie and the Jews got so little, including losing 60,000 square kilometers because of the partition. I have the original of this map. This is a League of Nations map. Look at the area that I have emphasized. This is a nota bene moment. Please look at what it says here. Within Palestine, an Arab government has been established within Palestine. So today, what is attempted is to take away from the remnant of Palestine, from the Jewish people, in breach of every right that was granted to them. Treaty of Lausanne is important because that's when Turkey finally gave up full title. And just quickly, the white paper, I can't dwell on that, but one of the most significant betrayal of a people in the history of mankind is what the British did in May of 1939. What they did, and this was a crime, they completely reneged and nullified the rights of the Jewish people by saying that an Arab state would be set up in the remnant of Palestine. By limiting immigration, which they didn't have the right to do, the limitations made sure that there would never be a Jewish majority. This was an absolutely odious, contemptible, disgusting breach of all their obligations. UN Charter, it's relevant. when the UN Charter, the UN was established in October of 1945, therefore before the independence of Israel. In the UN Charter, I have a lot of information on this. Article 80, please note, Article 80 was the result of huge submissions and interaction with the Jewish leaders who wanted to protect their rights under the Mandate for Palestine. They end up with this commitment, this pledge, this provision in the charter that says nothing in the charter shall be construed in or of itself to alter the rights of any people whatsoever that were given prior to the signing of the UN Charter. All of the rights that I'm presenting to you today were protected in the UN Charter, Article 80. I could spend an hour on that one. Now, many of you have heard about the partition resolution, an act of the General Assembly. It was in fact a recommendation. November 1947, it was Resolution 181-2. What you need to remember is that it was a recommendation of General Assembly, never binding. Only the Security Council in rare circumstances can issue binding resolutions, but this was not a binding resolution. And yet, when you look at hundreds of resolutions coming out of the UN, hundreds of them, they refer to the partition resolution as if it was the act, the event that gave the Arabs absolute rights. False. It was a resolution. Had it been adopted by both Jews and Arabs, and the terms of that resolution included in a treaty, it could have been a source of rights and obligations in international law. But the Arabs rejected it. And the Jews had accepted it conditionally. If the Arabs accepted it, they would. Why would the Jews in 1947 accept something that took away so much of their land? Ask that question. Reflect on that question. It's because they had gone through the trauma of the Holocaust. 6 million Jews massacred. A huge number of them still stuck in Europe, unable to go to Palestine because of the British policies, which somehow the atrocious conduct of the British to prevent the survivors from reaching Palestine. So at that point in time, it's like you have a car accident and you're hurt, you're wounded, and you're asked to sign something. So under duress, they agreed to do it, but the Arabs didn't. Birth of the State of Israel. So remember, you've seen this picture. May 1948, the declaration is made effective midnight. Therefore, May 15, 1948 is the first day of the new Jewish state, reestablished miraculously. Now, what's important about that is that in the declaration, Ben Gurion makes reference to the Balfour Declaration. He makes reference to the mandate, this this most significant Magna Carta document for the Jews. And he makes reference to what I called the keynote a few moments ago, the recognition of the historic connection between the Jewish people and Israel. Now, what you should know is that when he made the declaration on May 1948, the territory covered by it was all of the area, all of the remnant. So you know there was a war. I can't go into the details, but because of the war, the Jordanians equipped and trained and led by British military experts. The British were the key reason why the Jordanians were so successful in taking over East Jerusalem and what is called the West Bank. But there was an armistice agreement. So this is one of these documents legally, which, you know, if I can't sufficiently emphasize how key it is. The green line that everybody's talking about nonstop. Today, Israel is saying, respect the green line. Get out of Judea and Samaria. Get out of Jerusalem based on the green line. The green line is nothing other than an armistice agreement. And it says in Article 2, please look, no provision of this agreement will prejudice the rights and claims and positions of the parties as far as title and sovereignty is concerned. It was only the line where people would stop fighting, where armies would stop fighting. And as a result, as you know, Jordan continued illegally to occupy and possess that land for many, many years until 1967. And in 1967, Israel not only occupied all of what was referred to as the West Bank, but part of the Golan Heights and Gaza and the Sinai Peninsula. And there was a security resolution, I can't dwell on that, which basically demanded that Israel withdraw from some territories. As a legal expert, I say to Israel, you're not bound by that. There were preconditions, and the preconditions have not been met. The state of belligerency has never ceased. And then in 1980, Israel annexed Jerusalem. It's now part of the state of Israel. They appropriated what was given to them in law. They were there as a right, and they appropriated. They didn't do that in respect to the so-called West Bank and Judea and Samaria. They didn't annex it. They should have. But let me tell you this. This is key what I'm going to say next. They can still do it. They still have the right to do it. The reason they did is that they hoped, they fantasized that they could find a solution, a peaceful solution with the Palestinians. Now, this is what Jerusalem would look like if you divided it according to the Green Line today. Only the blue would remain Israeli. The dark green would be the Palestinian Jerusalem, and the old city, as you see, is completely within the Palestinian realm. The Green Line. Here's what the Green Line does to Judea and Samaria. I have a revised map, which is not here, where I show you really dozens of sacred sites, sacred communities, places that are, how can you reconstitute what you used to have and exclude Hebron, where the patriarchs are buried? How can you exclude Shechem completely, where Joseph's tomb is, and Shiloh, and of course Jerusalem? It's ridiculous. You can't. Those are their rights. Now, I want to mention that there was a request by the UN for an advisory opinion. The opinion has now been given in July. And what I can say about the opinion, I could spend 2 hours on that, but all the key historical events and material legal dispositions relating to the Holy Land, what I've spent 20 years focusing on and another 15 talking about, are ignored. They don't rewrite history. They ignore it as if it never happened. So for them, what matters is liberation struggles. You know how so many African countries became independent as a result of different struggles. And they've sort of, Palestinians have very wisely, smartly joined that parade and call themselves Palestinians, because should they call themselves Arabs, we could respond, well, wait a minute. You got 93% of the pie when the British intervened and liberated these areas from the Turks. You got 93%. And what you're trying to do right now is get more by subdividing Palestine. So I'm going to conclude with these remarks. It is absolutely vital for us not to be silent. We can't be silent. It's dark. It's getting really, really, really dark out there. The prophet Zechariah said something, and I think he was speaking to the UN. He was speaking to the ICJ. Speak judgment that are true, so that peace can follow. What the UN and the ICJ are doing is so false that the possibilities for any kind of peace with the so-called Palestinians is more remote at this moment in my life than ever before. And so it's very difficult unless you pay attention to certain scriptures to predict what's going to be happening in the days, weeks to come. But the nations had to make decisions. The valley of decision, they were there. And I wish I could say to you that France and Canada and the UK, Spain have made the right decisions. In fact, their decisions are very, very dangerous because it encourages, as you know, Hamas to continue to take their absurd positions and not release the hostages. They can smell victory. Can you imagine if the war ended now and the result was that the massacre of so many Jews on October 7 of 2023 led to the establishment of a Palestinian state? Their triumph truly would be historical. So we have to hope and pray that what happens next will not be what I've just referred to, like a absolute calamity, not only for Israel, but for the whole world. I'll stop here, Patricia.
Wow, absolutely phenomenal. Before I stop the recording, I want you to repeat something you said in the very beginning for anyone who came on late. And I want to say this to everybody in light of the fact that we felt to start a 21-day fast starting on Friday for Israel. It's ending on October 2nd, Yom Kippur. And this timing, because in all of this, what you have discussed, could you repeat again that today, September 9th, is the beginning of the 80th session of the UN, and it goes right till September 29. Could you repeat that? How this is such a strategic time as it's like coming to the table to try to divide up the land, correct? Could you say that?
Okay, so in order to understand the significance of this particular assembly, you have to remember that the decision, the advisory opinion of the ICJ was rendered in July 19 of 2024. And the decision is basically just only refers to occupied Palestinian territory. It talks about the transgressions of Israel in 20 pages of transgressions. It is pure. What they did, this is so relevant. They took a political manifesto never before presented by the Palestinian in any peace conference, any negotiation in Oslo, Camp David, ever. It's 50 times wider and deeper than what they've ever done before. They took the entirety of it and put it in their decision. This was followed by a conference of the General Assembly, and that conference was on July after this resolution. That conference is a lethal thing. In September 18, 2025. Please note the date, September 18. And the decision goes on. It's not a decision, it's a resolution. And it gives all the details as to when the Jews are supposed to come out of Judea and Samaria and out of East Jerusalem. And talks about reparations. It talks about the right of return of it. It goes beyond the fantasy of any possible Palestinian, what they adopted. And the end of the year that they talk about is September 18, 2025, therefore in a few days. By now, Jews should be out. So that's the background of this assembly. So you're going to hear nation after nation proclaim that the Palestinians have been misled, oppressed, and have been mistreated, and have been killed, and have been for so long. It's time for them to have a state. The problem is that you can't have a state if you don't have boundaries. You can't have a state if you don't have a stable government. Under the UN Charter, it's got to be a peace-loving people. None of this fits.
Wow. 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 I put in the chat the JH Israel giving link. We are giving a gift to Dr. Jacques Gauthier, as well as if you want to support the work of JH Israel, it's really good soil. So it's there in the link. I'm going to go ahead and pause this recording now because we want to post this.